You stolen my love, you now deserve.
It wasn't supposed to feel real. I wasn't prepared for this. People think it was just a projection, just a clever use of light and timing, just technology doing what technology does best. But that's not how it felt to Brian May. He has stood on stages for more than 5 decades. He has felt the ground shake under his feet from the roar of crowds. He has watched fireworks explode over stadiums. He has survived loss the way only musicians do, by turning pain into sound. And still, nothing prepared him for that night. When he reached out his hand, something reached back. He would later say he could explain the equipment. He could explain the software. He could explain the precision timing that made the illusion possible. But there was one thing he could not explain. The feeling. Not in London, not with that song, not with Freddie. June 2022, the O2 Arena. 20,000 people watched him sit alone with an acoustic guitar and begin the soft opening of Love of My Life. For them, it was a tribute. For Brian, it was a confrontation with something he had tried to live around for more than 30 years. What happened in those final seconds, what happened when memory and reality touched, was something he had kept to himself, until now. And the truth is, that moment almost never happened at all. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Freddie Mercury and Queen and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel. By the time the Rhapsody tour reached London, the show was already a perfectly tuned machine. Every beat, every light cue, every transition had been tested in front of thousands of people around the world. There was confidence in the production, but there was one section that never felt automatic: Love of My Life. In early planning meetings, the production team made the suggestion, what if, during the song, Freddie appeared on the giant screen and sang with Brian? A virtual duet using restored footage. To everyone else, it made sense. It was emotional. It was powerful. It felt like something fans would never forget. Brian didn't respond right away. In the quiet of the control room, he stared at the mock-up image on the monitor. Freddie's young face, frozen in a moment of joy from another lifetime. He imagined himself sitting under that massive screen, alone with his guitar, while Freddie's image towered above him. It didn't feel like a tribute. It felt like reopening a wound he had learned to survive without touching. Not yet, he finally said. The truth was simple and frightening. He didn't know if he was strong enough to face that moment. Not on that stage, not in London, not with that song. But quiet decisions have a strange way of changing shape over time, and the first real test came when the arena was still empty. The O2 Arena, when it's empty, doesn't feel like a venue. It feels like a cathedral, vast, silent, echoing with the ghosts of sound that haven't arrived yet. Brian walked onto the stage alone for the first full technical test of the sequence. No crowd, no roar, just engineers at their stations and the faint hum of equipment warming up. He carried his acoustic guitar like something fragile. "All right, Brian," a voice called from the sound desk. "We're going to run the projection. Just face the screen for timing." He nodded. The screen flickered, grain, static. Then Freddie appeared. Not a cartoon, not an actor, not a synthetic imitation, but Freddie, alive in motion, playful, breathing, real in every way that mattered. The tilt of the head, the sparkle in the eyes, the smile that always arrived a fraction of a second before the voice. Brian struck the first chord, then stopped. His fingers froze. His breath tightened. A technician rushed closer. "Do you want to stop?" Brian didn't answer. He just stared at the screen. "Dr. May, should we cut the projection?" Then, very softly, with a voice smaller than the arena itself, Brian whispered, "Again, please." They ran it again. This time, he played through. But when Freddie lifted his hand during the scripted moment, Brian couldn't lift his own. It wasn't the timing that needed adjusting. It was his heart. And that made him remember something he had never forgotten. Love of My Life was never meant for stadiums. It wasn't born as an anthem. It arrived quietly, as something personal, almost private, disguised as a melody. Brian remembers the first time Freddie played the early chords in a small, dimly lit room. No stage persona, no bravado, just concentration. just a man shaping a confession into sound. The song wasn't about the band, it wasn't about fame. It was about one person, and the kind of love that reshapes a life even when it ends. Over time, the song escaped its origin. It became communal. At concerts, from Brazil to Japan, millions of voices would rise and sing every word. The audience turned it into their own story of loss and devotion. Brian used to joke that the crowd did all the singing for him. But the truth was heavier. He knew they were singing for Freddie. Every voice carried the ache of absence, the understanding that some sounds never return the same way again. And for Brian, playing that song alone on stage was never just a performance. It was a ritual, a memory, a conversation with someone who could no longer answer. So when the idea of performing it with Freddie, even digitally, returned, Brian felt the weight of that memory shift. London was waiting, and so was the question he still hadn't answered. Would this moment heal him or break him? June 2022. The O2 Arena was sold out. 20,000 people gathered beneath a ceiling of light, energy rising with every beat of the show. Backstage, Brian adjusted his guitar strap over and over, something he rarely did. His hands were steady, his thoughts were not. He knew what was coming next. Adam Lambert finished the previous song to thunderous applause. The lights dimmed. A soft hush swept across the arena, one of those rare silences that only happens when a crowd senses something sacred is about to unfold. Brian walked onto the stage alone. The opening chords of Love of My Life rang out. Instantly, the audience erupted into cheers and singing. Thousands of voices joined him on the very first line. But they didn't know the truth. Brian was not afraid of the song. He was afraid of what would happen after the second verse. Behind him, a faint shimmer of light began gathering on the massive screen. Soft at first, almost invisible, like a memory assembling itself. Brian felt it before he saw it. His breathing slowed. His grip tightened. And then the stage behind him began to change. The figure appeared first as a silhouette, a familiar stance, squared shoulders, microphone tilted at the exact angle no one else ever quite matched. Then the light strengthened. Freddie Mercury stood on the giant screen. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and uncontrollable. Screams, sobs, disbelief echoing into one massive emotional wave. For many in the audience, time folded in on itself. Past and present collided in a single breath. Brian didn't turn around right away. He kept his eyes on the guitar. If he looked too soon, he wasn't sure what would happen to him. But Freddie's restored voice filled the arena. Clean, powerful, unmistakably alive. Finally, Brian looked up, and something inside him collapsed and rebuilt itself at the same time. There was Freddie's smile, the one Brian had seen across control rooms and backstage corridors for decades, the one that once meant tomorrow, not forever. The hologram lifted its hand. Brian felt the air leave his lungs. This was the moment he had feared in private and waited for in secret, because now the song was no longer just being played, it was being shared across time. Brian had rehearsed the timing perfectly, the lighting shift, the movement of the projection, the music cue. Every detail had been refined to precision, but no one had rehearsed the emotion. As Freddie's projected arms slowly extended, Brian hesitated, not because he forgot the choreography, but because memory is heavier than muscle. He took one step forward, then another, slowly, like someone approaching something beautiful and dangerous at once. 20,000 people fell into silence. Brian raised his hand. It trembled under the spotlight. He wasn't acting. He wasn't performing. He was remembering. Freddie's projected fingers hovered inches from his own. Then the moment happened. When Brian's hand met the hologram, the illusion stopped feeling digital. It felt like every shared studio night, every argument, every laugh, every unspoken apology. The crowd erupted. Applause, sobs, cheers. Brian heard none of it. For one impossible second, it felt as if Freddie had reached back, and Brian broke. But the song still had one last note to give. The final chord faded into the rafters. Brian lowered his guitar but didn't move. The roar of the crowd washed over him like something distant, as if he were submerged beneath it. Freddie's image lingered on the screen for a heartbeat longer. Too bright, too alive. Then it dissolved. That was the moment something inside Brian cracked. His shoulders dipped, his jaw tightened. A quiet tremor ran through him. He tried to hide it by adjusting the microphone. The cameras almost missed it. Almost. In the audience, people covered their mouths. Some cried openly. Others lowered their phones, unable to record what suddenly felt too personal. Because everyone understood the truth at once. The projection was a tribute. The performance was planned. But the grief was real. Brian wiped his face quickly. Not for the crowd. He had cried in front of them before. But because this time felt different. This time, the past had reached through the present and touched him back. The music had stopped, but his mourning had not. And that was when the meaning of the night finally revealed itself. For years, Brian rarely spoke about the deepest layer of losing Freddie, the quiet guilt. Not guilt for something he had done, but for everything he could not stop. Watching a friend fade slowly is a helpless kind of suffering. He once described it as watching an eclipse in slow motion. So this night in London was not about the audience. It was not even about the band. It was about a conversation that had ended too soon. Brian personally approved every frame of the tribute, every lighting decision, every second of timing, not out of perfectionism, but because this was his way of speaking to someone who could no longer answer. When Freddie appeared, it wasn't nostalgia. It was unfinished business made visible. This was Brian saying, "I still hear you. I still remember. I'm still here." And sometimes, memory doesn't want to be celebrated. Sometimes, it wants to be answered. And then the audience did something no one expected. As Freddie vanished from the screen, a sound rose from the crowd. Not applause at first, not cheering, but something deeper. A collective breath breaking open. Then, softly, they began to sing. "Love of my life, don't leave me." 20,000 voices carried the song back to Brian. Unprompted, unplanned, pure. Brian stepped back from the microphone, stunned. For the first time that night, he wasn't alone with his grief. He looked out across the sea of faces and realized something that shifted inside him forever. Every person in that arena had loved Freddie too, in their own way, in their own life. And now, they were giving part of that love back. The loneliness he had carried for decades loosened its grip. When the final echo faded, Brian lifted his head. His eyes were wet, but lighter. As the spotlight dimmed, he touched his chest gently and whispered something almost no one heard. "Good night, old friend." For the first time since 1991, it felt like a real goodbye, not one spoken through tears, but through healing. If this story moved you, if this moment between Brian and Freddie changed the way you see their bond, subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the heart of rock history. Like the video so this moment can reach other fans who still carry Queen in their lives. And leave your comment below. Do you believe this was Brian's true goodbye to Freddie, or just the beginning of something he had waited decades to feel?